התחלנו.
רק אם הרולד רוצה לעשות עוד פעם את ההקדשה, איפה הרולד?
בסדר גמור, אתה כבר, כן, אוקיי.
Okay, good morning to everybody. So I'll review the title for today's shir. I'll give a minute for everyone to come online. The title for today's shir is trying to understand all the difficult stories about Yaakov. So the way I want to begin the shir, so people get started, anyone who wants, in a very short way, tell me if there's a story in this week's parsha, next week's parsha, or from now to the rest of Breshit, about Yaakov's behavior that sounds a little bit problematic. Just real short, like not more than 10, 15 seconds. Just tell me a story that bothers you a little bit about his behavior.
Manipulating the flocks.
Manipulating, the genetic engineering. Okay, I didn't even put that on my list, but that's a good, if we get there, maybe we'll get there. I'll call that genetic engineering. All right.
Buying the birthright.
Oh, buying or which one? The buying the birthright or stealing the birthright?
Well, the beginning for a pottage for the soup, okay. Under duress, obtaining it under duress.
Okay, and now I'll give you another 20 seconds. Tell me, what's so bad about what he did? From a business point of view.
It took advantage of somebody's state. We don't quite know why, but it potentially took advantage of someone to rob them, to diminish them or something, even though it says that Esau didn't appreciate his birthright. But he may not appreciate it, but it still was his.
Yeah. So, in other words, what he did was a pretty rotten way to buy something.
Well, it was using methods which we would not agree with are the best.
Yeah. Okay. I would. It wouldn't be. Okay. I agree with you. Okay. That's for sure a problem. Okay. So everyone agrees that that's a major problem. Hopefully, we'll discuss that today. How about in the next story when he steals the blessings? When Rivka dresses him up and steals the blessings? Was that good or bad?
It's bad. It's bad.
That's not okay. How about after that? How about the neder he makes? If God takes care of me, this and that. Remember, he makes
the 10% deal. I think that he should have offered God more than 10%.
Okay. Well, maybe he was worried that people might learn from him. Maybe
Right.
It might have been a takana for future generations. Maybe I was half listening to this share beforehand. Maybe he was worried what would happen to future generations. Maybe it's public policy. So if he would do, maybe he should have done 20%. But if he did 20, then all future taxation would be 20%, and that would be too hard. That would be exer that the tzibur can hold on to.
It was a strange decision. Asur Esren Allah is the kickback of 10%.
Yeah, you should be getting more already. Okay. And any later story? Any other story later that bothers you about him?
That he didn't.
Yeah, his response to the Maaseh with Shimon and Levi and Shechem.
Right.
I think there's some problems with how Yaakov responds to that.
So if you're a right winger, he was too soft on them. If you're a left winger, he agreed. If you're a left winger, you don't like what he did because he agreed with them too much. If you're a left winger, you don't like what he did because if you're a right winger, he didn't support them enough, maybe. Whatever it is, everyone doesn't like what he did there from one way or the other.
Well, what is really problematic is that when Shimon and Levi offered him the explanation, he's silent, or the Torah does not record.
Yeah, what he said. Yeah,
the response from Yaakov, which I think that's what it to me is that's problematic.
Yeah, because it was their system. Yeah, but we'll get to that also. Okay, yeah. And any more? I'll take one more in case anything else happens.
Favoritism. It's favoritism of Yosef and all that sort of
okay. There's not just Yosef, fine. But after Yosef is gone, his over favoritism to Binyamin, the heck with all the other sons, so what? Shimon's gonna, die in jail there, and you guys are starved. No one's touching my Binyamin. Like there's how come Binyamin how come he rates so much more than all the other brothers? Agreed? So I'm going to try and answer all those today. Not sure how. I think like 3 hours now.
Extend the time.
What I need to begin with, I guess there's another title for this year. Anyone remember the last line of the Navi Micha? You know it by heart, but you don't realize it's the last line of Micha. I'll help you out. The last line of Tashlich. In Tashlich, almost in an amazing way, we quote from Micha. The last 3 lines of Micha. Remember, Miyav Kamocha, Nafsei Avon V'Ofer Pesha? No, that's earlier in that's in the end of Perek Vav. The end of the book is Titein Emet Liakov.
Chesed.
That's Abraham. Titein Emet Liakov. I'm not sure what it's referring to, but it might be a wish. Is Yaakov Avinu or Yaakov another name for Am Yisrael? Unclear. But Titein Emet Liakov, if there's a midah of our avot, Chesed with Abraham makes sense. But remembering Emet in relation to Yaakov is quite difficult because his whole life is full of trickery. If you're looking with a forefather who's like the symbol of Emet and truth, it's very hard to identify Yaakov as the example of truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's an alternative. Now we're going to get to work. Who's ever online is online. We're going to get to work. Now, I checked the Torah Mitzion website to make sure which year I'm given on this in the past. And sure enough, I noticed this morning that last year I gave a shir called Bechira Bechora Bracha. And some of you were there. I'm not going to give you a test on it, but I need that shir as a background for today's shir. So I'm not going to do that shir over. I'm going to review the key points of that shir because that's going to be my point of departure to try to explain everything in Yaakov's behavior. And just to review the key points of the shir, and I'll share the screen in a minute. I defined 3 different words. I'm not saying that's exactly what the words mean, but I'm going to define them for the sake of the shir. We call it the letter B, or letter Bet, because all of them. There's Bechira, Bechora, and Bracha. 3 concepts that take us through Sefer Bereshit. Bechira is the process of who's being chosen. First, it's Abraham, to exclusion of everyone else. Then it's Yitzchak, to exclusion of Ishmael and Keturah's sons. And then it's Yaakov, to the exclusion of Esav. And then it's over with Yaakov, and when we get to Yaakov, everyone's chosen. I'll show a diagram of this in a minute. Then there's another concept called bracha, that a father, before he dies, gives blessings to his children based on their behavior. Towards when the father feels his time is up or it's coming close to his death, he wants to make sure that the family legacy continues. He gives blessings to his children. And then there's a concept of bechora, of leadership. Bechora technically means firstborn, but rarely does it go to whoever was born first. By default, it should go to who's born first. But bechora is more type of a leadership of a nation, of a family. And when a father who is leading the family passes on, he wants to make sure that at least one of his children are going to lead the family to make sure the legacy continues. I want to begin with, maybe someone remembers, I want to prove first that the word bechora is not about being born first, but it's about leadership. And not just leadership, but very important leadership. And this will help us begin. Who remembers the first time I have the concept of Bechorah in Sefer Shmot? Anyone remember? In Sefer Shmot.
B'ni Bechori.
Very good. In the end of Perek Daled, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, when he's leaving Midian, before anything begins, he tells Moshe, I gave you all those signs, go to Pharaoh, tell him, send my people out and everything. But your opening line to Pharaoh, in the end of Perek Daled is, tell Paro, B'ni Bechori Yisrael. Now, if you remember Chumash, before Avram is born, there's 70 nations. If God has a firstborn child, that means he has more than one child. And there's lots of children. There's 70 nations. They're all God's children. But he calls the Jewish nation that's forming now in Egypt, that is my firstborn child. Now, if you look at the history of nations at that time period, if it's the late Bronze, Egypt is the firstborn. Egypt is one of the most major civilizations at the time. And if you're asking civilization-wise, Egypt is almost like a firstborn child because they're one of the greatest civilizations and one of the earliest ones. But what God's saying is, I have a nation that's going to take leadership for nations. They have a job to do from God's point of view. And God calls his new nation his firstborn. not because they're born first, but because they have the responsibility. Now, the big question is Bechorah privilege or responsibility? If it was, I couldn't do this in America, but I can do this in Israel. Let's say someone's running for president. Is he motivated because he cares about his country? He's patriotic. He wants to be president because he wants all the responsibility. He thinks he can do a great job and save his nation. Or is it all about himself? I'll get rich. I'll be famous. I'll be great. I can make a lot of money on it. Or any public position, shul president, whatever, class president, mayor of a city. When someone takes public responsibility, when someone takes leadership, is that leadership all about responsibility or is it about privilege? Now, from a monetary point of view, what privilege does the firstborn get? Just think plain old business. If you're the firstborn, from a financial point of view, what does that translate into? Just with laws of
Mishnayim.
means it's complete. You get a double portion. If there's 9 children and the father leaves over $1,000, then every son gets $100. The poor gets $200. That's Pishon. That's classic. So that's definitely a privilege. The question is, what's the reason for that privilege? Does the poor get a double portion because he has more responsibility, or that's something he lucked out because he was born first? Now, what we're going to find is that Yaakov and Esav are having an argument over who should be the Bechor. And even when they were born, it was a close call. If you remember, we read that this morning. When they're coming out, but it's a race for who's coming out first. But when Yaakov and Esav are fighting over the Bechorah or arguing for the Bechorah or selling it, does Yaakov want the Bechorah because he wants the double portion? Because he wants to be famous, he wants to be great? Or does he want to take leadership of the family and he thinks that, that goal may be so important that it might be okay to use trickery to do that? I don't want to bring examples, but let's say you're sure that the political system in a certain country is bad, and you're sure that you can offer better political leadership, and you're sure that the person running the country, or might be running, would be a disaster, and you're sure you can do it better. What actions are you allowed to take to make sure that you take leadership? You follow? It's a massive question to this very day in Israel, isn't it? What's permitted and what dangers do you take? And how much do you bend the law a little bit or maybe lie a little bit for a greater good? Now, let me open up the waiting room here. Okay. Now, I want to begin with a 5-minute summary of the shir we did last year to understand this idea of Bechorah, which will hopefully explain what's going on in this shir. Here's my file. Here we go. I'll make this real small and just. Am I right that we did this shir last year? For those who were in this year, remember this drawing with algebra? Maybe. Just tell me yes or no. Otherwise, I'll go slow. You guys remember this page?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, someone remembers. Okay, so I won't go too fast. I won't go too slow. Here we go. What I explained is follows. Let me make this bigger now, and I'll explain my drawing. It's called Using Algebra to Explain Sefer Bereshit. And I don't have I can't draw with this, can I? Oh, I don't have a drawing tool, but it's okay. We'll be fine. You can see my little. Do you see my little mouse moving around?
Yep.
You see that?
We see it.
Okay, good. Now, what's happening? This process, this converging process, I refer to as Bechira. What's that mean? From all the nations, from all the people, God picks Avram Avinu to start a nation. Avram is chosen to start a nation. Even though God told Avram Avinu, your children are chosen, God sort of limits that later on in chapter 17, in the story of Brit Milah, where God says, Ki b'Yitzchak yikrei l'chazara. Only Yitzchak is chosen and nobody else. Even though Yishmael was born, Yishmael will be great, he'll be a nation, but not the chosen nation. Yishmael is out. Keturah's children are out. Only Yitzchak is chosen. Even though I promised you your children, but only Yitzchak. Yitzchak gives birth to 2 children, Yaakov and Esav. For some reason, only Yaakov is chosen. Esav is not part of the nation. When Yaakov is chosen, what do we know? All of Yaakov's children are chosen. And from that time on, born Jewish, you're always Jewish. So there's a converging process called Bechira. That's Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Once it's over, then we have tribes, and everyone's chosen. Each tribe will get a blessing from their father. That's the last story in Sefer Breshit in Parshat Vaychi, when Yaakov blesses all the tribes. And one of those sons is going to be the leader, the Bechor. Will it be Reuven, who was born first? Well, maybe it should have been, but he messed up, didn't he? Shimon and Levi, well, Yaakov doesn't like their behavior either, even though maybe some of us do like their behavior. Yehuda, he proved himself with leadership. So is Yehuda going to be the leader? Or maybe Yosef might be the Bechor, because he was Rachel's firstborn son. Maybe he'll get a double portion, or maybe he'll lead. How come I brought that up? Because what happens in the end, one type of leadership goes to Yehuda. Remember, I'll tell you, Yehuda's going to be a leader, but also Yosef will get a double portion, because Yosef becomes two tribes, Ephraim and Binyamin. But now, this Bechira process takes 3 generations, which I call N equals 3. N represents the number of generations in the process. And therefore, what I want to show you is what's going to explain a lot of the questions in Sefer Breshit is the fact that our forefathers don't know what the final value of N is going to be. Because we know that Bechira process took 3 generations. What I was suggesting was that Avram Avinu thought that it was an event, not a process, that he was chosen. Avram assumed all of his children would be chosen. He wanted Ishmael to be part of the nation. It was his son. He even wanted Lot, his nephew. B'nei Keturah. Who decided only one son? That was God's decision. Now, why was that? Because Sarah is the only matriarch. There's one patriarch, one matriarch. And maybe had Sarah had more children, maybe they all would have been chosen. We'll never know because she only had one child. But it was God, the Bechira process is up to God. And if you follow your Chumash, God's name El Shaddai starts the process. In chapter 17, God says, my name is El Shaddai. I'm changing your name from Avram to Abraham. And now you'll have a child. His name will be Yitzchak. And he's the only one chosen. And it ends with Yaakov. Also in Perek Lamed Hey, in Parshat Vayishlach, God tells Yaakov, Ani El Shaddai, all your children are chosen, and I'm changing your name from Yaakov to Israel. So the two times in Chumash where El Shaddai speaks and changes the name, it's when the process begins and process ends. That's the Bechira process. We did that more in detail last year. Now, why do we use that? We use that to explain. Wait, let me open up the waiting room. Okay, there we go. Admit all. 1 second. Admitting to the waiting room. Already. They're in. One more. Okay, we're in. Back to the side. Sorry about that. Now, back to what did we explain last year? What I tried to explain last year is that if I want to understand what Yitzchak's doing, why is Yitzchak blessing Esav and not Yaakov? My assumption is that Yitzchak has every reason to think that all of his children are chosen. That's what I call N equals 2. God told, we read that this morning. Remember, God says there's a famine in the land. God tells Yitzchak, don't go down to Egypt, stay in land. Remember, Gur ba'aretz hazot, ve'yem chava barcheka. Remember that line? Ki lecha v'zarcha tenet kol haaretz otel. You're the only chosen one, and therefore, you're chosen and your children. Don't go, because you're chosen, and you and all your children are chosen, don't go down to Egypt. You stay in Israel, I'll take care of you here. There's no reason for Yitzchak to think that only one son would be chosen. Yitzchak thinks that Yaakov and Esav are both chosen. And the only question is, who's going to lead the family? And therefore, the blessing that Yitzchak was planning to give Esav, which Yaakov stole or tricked him to get, was not a blessing that you're the only one, but rather you're the leader. If you remember that blessing, I'll just have it right over here real fast. That blessing was, you should be a rich man. Remember, you should be wealthy. That's a blessing. That's not you're the only one. And you should be the head of a nation that other nations will bow down to and appreciate and respect. But within the family, you're the leader. The blessing that Yitzchak was planning to give Esav was, you should be the leader of the family. Your brothers will be subservient to you, but you're all in the same family. You'll be running a nation that other nations look up to, and you should be wealthy because you have a big job to do. And as long as I have the source sheet here, the Ibn Ezra had a beautiful insight because he asked the question, how could Yitzchak make a mistake if he was a Navi? So I won't go through the whole Ibn Ezra because he just says everyone else is wrong. And then he says, Banuchon be'inai, if I have this over here, what's Ibn Ezra saying? What do I think is the right thing? Shibirkat Navi ke'in tfilahi. What Yitzchak was telling Esav, the blessing that Yitzchak was planning to give Esav, which went to Yaakov, wasn't an actual blessing of determining anything. It was a prayer about the Jewish people. Vashem shamat tfilato. It wasn't a false prophecy. God answered his tefillah. Why? Kikar zot habracha al zaram. He says Yitzchak's blessing, and we're going to return to this later on, is actually a blessing not on a specific child, but on the Jewish people. We should be a people that God should bless with prosperity. We should be wealthy, but we should use our wealth for the better good, for the good of all people. We should be in a leadership position among nations. Other nations, we need to become a nation that other nations are bow down to. Now, at the time of Yitzchak, we're not a nation yet. We're barely a family. So he says, this idea of Yavducha Amim, Yishtachva Lu'umim, is not for Esav the person. It's a blessing for the Jewish people, but within the Jewish people, Esav should be the leader, assuming that Esav would be the Bechor. And just to prove that, if you look in Tehillim, it's the last book in the last Mizmor in book 2 of Tehillim. It's a Mizmor, it's a psalm by David HaMelech to his son Shlomo. For Shlomo, that Shlomo should be a king doing justice and righteousness, Yadinam Chabet Tzedek, but towards the end he says other nations should come and serve you. Okay, Malchei Tarshish, from Turkey, from Tarshish, wherever that is, far away, but this great area, the kings of that area should come and bow down to you. From the islands of Greece, people should bring you presents. From Ethiopia and Sudan, they should make peace treaties with you and come and respect you. The blessing that David HaMelech is giving Shlomo for his kingdom is almost the exact same blessing that Yitzchak was planning to give Esav, that you should be the leader of a nation that other nations respect and not bow down to out of fear, but out of respect. Why would they bow down to us? He goes on, he says, we should be a nation with prosperity, but be a model nation representing God by using our prosperity to help those in need. And we want a king who talks about God, but uses his wealth and his wisdom and his prosperity for the betterment, for the good of his people and for the good of all civilization. So what Ibn Ezra was explaining, the Yitzchak was not really choosing one son over the other, it was simply giving a prayer for the Jewish people. If we have time, we'll return to this prayer later on. Now, let's go back to our explanation. If we're correct, Yitzchak has no reason to think that only one is chosen. One mother, Rivka, one matriarch, twins. I can explain Yishmael was out because of his mother was Hagar. So I can explain why Yishmael was out. But there's no logical reason why Yitzchak should think that both children aren't chosen. And if I have two sons, Esav, an Ish Sadeh, he's a doer, and Yaakov, he's an Ish Tam, and one has to be the leader, then of course Esav is the guy. I think I gave the analogy last year that Esav is sort of like the secular Jew, and Yaakov is the yeshiva bacher, and let Esav do the army, run the politics, and let Yaakov sit and learn. And that's a great way to raise money for yeshiva, but we call later Yisachar and Zvulun. That might have been what Yitzchak was thinking, but what we try to explain is that that's the Havamina. God wants to bring that possibility up so that we can undo it, because to be the Jewish people, you need the Kol of Yaakov and the Yadayim of Esav. You need, in the same character of a nation, I can't divide those two elements into two different people. It's got to be within the same person, meaning Am Yisrael has to be a nation who we have the voice of Yaakov and the hands of Esav. If you're going to go and fight and be in politics, you also have to begin with the Kol of Yaakov, but that's already for a Sicha. As for a drasha, we call that the Hesder Vor. Now, Rivka knows better. What's Rivka know? God told Rivka when she was having a child, remember? When she was pregnant, that's not two brothers, that's Shnei Goyim b'vitnech. That's two nations, and only one of them is going to be chosen, and it'll be the younger one. That's why Rivka knows better why she didn't tell Esav, why she didn't tell Yitzchak, not for today's shir. That's a great Ramban. Now, if I go back to what Yitzchak was thinking, if Yitzchak was planning to give Esav the Bechorah, and Yitzchak was blind to Esav's bad behavior, it makes sense that he wanted to bless Esav to run the family. What's the proof that when the children are growing up, the assumption is they're both chosen? Because Yaakov and Esav are fighting over who's the firstborn, not over who's the only one. The blessing is not a blessing you and nobody else. The blessing is who's leading the family, who's the president, who's the prime minister. Yaakov, recognizing Esav's weaknesses, and Esav isn't really fit for the job, it's his goal to take the job because he thinks he should be running the family. Now, when Esav comes in from a hard day's work, remember, he's tired, he puts his feet up and stuff like that. He said, "Oh, give me that bowl of soup." I don't think he's about to die. He's not deathly ill. He just came for a whole day of hunting. He's just exhausted. He wants the remote control and a beer and a pizza and live it up. He asks Yaakov, "Give me a bowl of soup." What does Yaakov do? He says, "You want a bowl of soup? Okay, first give me the birthright." And Esav, as someone mentioned before, is willing to sell the birthright for a bowl of soup. That's the last line of the parsha. V'tivez Esav et habchora. Let me just show you that pasuk real fast. Let's stop the share and do another share. If you remember the end of that story, which is unclear when we read it, but if you look at it carefully, where are we here? In the end of the story, we're in the end of chapter 25. Remember? V'tivez Esav et habchora. He'id hakatuv al risho shebiza avodato shamakom. If Esau is willing to sell a bowl of soup, to sell his bechorah for a bowl of soup, that shows he didn't really care much about the firstborn. It means, what did Esav say? I'm going to die. Not I'm going to die if I don't get that bowl of soup. I'm going to die 10, 20, 50 years from now. Who cares about the future? I only care about today. It's not I'm going to die in 10 minutes if I don't have the bowl of soup. It's I have no goal for the future other than my own life, and that's it. And who cares about Bechorah? And therefore, you know what? I'll sell it for a bowl of soup. And Yaakov takes advantage of that attitude of Esav to take the Bechorah to lead the family. That's how we try to understand the story here. The method Yaakov's using might be questionable, but his goal, I think, makes sense. Again, if I'm assuming that both are chosen, and the brothers growing up, and the question is not who's the only one, but who's going to lead the family. Now, so because Rivka knows that it's going to go one more generation, and it's going to be Yaakov, and she knows that Yitzchak doesn't know that, that explains Rivka's behavior. Why does she get involved? She's sure that she's doing the right thing because she understands that's why God gave her that nevuah. If God told her and not her husband, she understands that it's her tafkid in life. Her destiny is to make sure that Yaakov becomes the only one. What did she do, the right thing or wrong thing? You can argue, but Rivka sure she's doing the right thing. Yaakov listens to his mother because she promises him, it'll be okay. No, don't worry about being cursed, it'll be fine. And remember, Yaakov is only worried not about doing something wrong, but he's worried about being caught. Remember what Yaakov tells Rivka? What happens if he touches me and realizes he may curse me instead of blessing me? He's not saying, oh, maybe I'm lying. He's not saying, midvar sheker techach, I shouldn't do it. He agrees on the goal, but he's just afraid that the tactic, the strategy is right. The tactic he's arguing, maybe it's a bad tactic. And Rivka's, don't worry, the tactic will work. And she was right, it did work. Now, so that's we spent last year's share on that incident and used that to explain it. Now let's get to the next story about Yaakov's neder. Let's go back to our screen again. And what Yaakov is doing when he's running away. Because of this pattern, that Yishmael was thrown out, and later Esav will see. But when Yishmael was thrown out of the family, he was sent away, wasn't he? He was sent away from Israel. Yitzchak, who was chosen, couldn't leave Israel. When Yaakov goes away to Padan Aram to get a wife, and Yitzchak sends him away, so Yitzchak says, go get a wife and come back one day, things will be great. But Yaakov might think exactly the opposite. Maybe my father and mother are just being nice to me. Maybe I'm being sent away like Ishmael was sent away. Maybe I'm unchosen. Therefore, Yaakov needs reassurance that he indeed is chosen, which takes us to the story in this week's Parsha. Not this week, but next week's in Parsha Vayetze. But I want to end with the final lines of this week's Parsha. Let me share a different screen now. I want to share the screen. What happens at the end of Parshat? At the beginning of Perek Chavchet. I'm sorry, Perek Chavchet. Let me open up Perek Chavchet real fast. We'll need this later on. In the end of Perek Chavchet, the beginning of Perek Chavchet, Yitzchak calls Yaakov. It says, go get a wife, and then he blesses him as follows: the El Shaddai Yivarechotcha. God should bless you, but El Shaddai, that's the God who chose him over Ishmael. Okay? And he should give you, be fruitful, multiply. This is all the blessing of Brit Milah. And God should give you the blessing of Abraham to inherit the land of Israel as he promised Abraham. Here, Yitzchak is not granting Yaakov, you are the chosen one. He's praying and blessing him that God should choose him. Now that Yitzchak realizes it's up for grabs now, and N won't be 2, N will be 3. Means it's going to go one more generation. It's either Yaakov or Esav, after Rivka talked to him. Now he's blessing him that even though he's leaving, God should look over him and make sure he's the chosen one. But that's up to God to decide, because God decides it's the Bechira process. And therefore, in Parshat Vayetze, what happens? In Parshat Vayetze, what happens? Yaakov comes to, he's on his way to Haran. He stops where he stops, has his dream, and that'll be our topic now. That's Parshat Vayetze, Vayed Harana. So I'm going to stop this year and go now to the main topic today. What I want to explain now is what's Yaakov's neder? What's the reason for what he's doing? And what we need to do now is real simple. Let me close up this screen here. Close participants. Okay, now, and close the chat. If anyone has questions, you can write in the chat and I'll see it real fast. All right, let me stop here for a minute. I hope everything's clear till now. Any questions, I'll take them now. But now I want to get to the main topic. I want to understand, why is Yaakov playing fair weather Jew? God, you take care of me, I'll help you. And why, like you said, only 10%? So let's take a look at Yaakov's neder. Here we are, and we go to a different file now. Yaakov's neder here. How does it begin? Yaakov leaves from Beersheba and goes to Haran. I'm going to put out a word, which hopefully we'll get to later on. It's called a milah mancha. Vayivga bamakom. See that? In fact, maybe I can just do a quick little Control F and write the word makom. It should come up automatically. Maybe not. Okay, find the next one. Here we go. Vayivga bamakom v'yelkiv hashemesh v'kach me'avnei hamakom vayishka bamakom bahu. See the word makom? It's like highlighted. It's overemphasized in the section. Now, then he has a dream. He has a dream. That's the background. Then Yaakov has a dream. What's in his dream? He sees a ladder, everyone's a ladder with angels going up and down. And Hashem stands upon him, Nitzav alav, and tells him, listen, this is the very first time that God speaks to Yaakov. And this is a blessing of reassurance. This is what God tells him. Ani Hashem Elohei Avraham Avicha Ve'elei Yitzchak. That's God identifies himself, which means that Yitzchak had taught Yaakov about their heritage. He knows this idea of being chosen. And the first thing God tells him, even though you're leaving the land that you're now lying on and about to leave, is going to be yours one day. That's the blessing of Bechira, isn't it? That's the blessing. God told Avram the same thing in when he arrived in Shechem, remember? He says, this is a land, remember you arrived in Shechem? He says, your children will get this land. In Brit Bein Tarim, God says, I'm giving this land, this is land I'm giving you. Now, look in Pasuk Yadaladel. Your children will be like the dust of the earth. And you should spread out in all 4 directions. And you should bring a blessing to all. Through you, all the nations will be blessed. Now, this line, Pasuk Yadalad, let's go back. Pasuk Yud Gimel is something old. Agreed? I've got to say that many times. Is Pasuk Yudalid something old? This phrase, Afar Haaretz, that phrase, is that something old or something new? I'll take answers if you want. Is that a new blessing or an old blessing that God had given before?
Given to Abraham.
Where was it given to Abraham?
When he was leaving He's a Malalacha.
But when did God tell Avram his seed will be like Afar Haaretz?
Bit Atari.
No, I was hoping you. That's the wrong answer. In Brit Bein of Tarim, God tells Avram Avinu, your children will be like Kochvei Hashamayim, like the stars in heaven, not like the dust of the earth. It's two different analogies. And he doesn't mention anything in Brit Bein of Tarim about all four directions, does he? But there is an earlier case where God told something very similar to Avram Avinu.
Yeah.
Anyone know where?
Chof Hayam.
When he first enters the land, Bethel.
Say that again?
When he enters the land, there's a korban mizbeach at Bethel.
But he doesn't say Afar Haaretz there, does he? Okay, you're right.
Chof Hayam.
Okay. He says Kechol Hayam. That's after the Akedah. In the Akedah, Kochvei Hashamayim and Kol Hayam Yedzin. Afar Haaretz is not at the Akedah, and Afar Haaretz is not in Brit Bein of Tarim or in Brit Milah.
When he leaves Egypt.
Close, but not exactly. It's after Lot leaves. I'll share. Let me share. I'll make an easier screen for here. Let's take a look. The first thing God tells Avram Avinu in Lech Lecha, we'll just start with Lech Lecha. Remember, I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you, and then I'll bless those who bless you. V'nivruchu b'cha. That's an old one, isn't it? That's the opening blessing. Through you, I'll bring blessing to the nations. That's the idea of universalism, that you're chosen for a purpose for the sake of other nations to be God's model nation. Avram arrives in Shechem, and God tells him, L'zaracha etein et haaretz hazot. And Avram builds a mizbeach, doesn't he? Saying thank you. Then from Shechem, he travels to Beit El, doesn't he? And in Beit El, he builds a mizbeach and calls out in God's name. That's the highlight of his aliyah. Making a name for God. I think we explained before. That's not talking to God, but talking about God. Calling out in God's name, Ramban, Sforno explained beautifully. That Avram begins his mission. That's the paradigm. That's the model for the future of Judaism. Avram is a respected businessman, well-known, does chesed, entertains people, talks about God, and sanctifies God by his behavior, the way he talks, the way he acts, and what he does. And his Mizbech in Beit El is a central place for spreading this concept of ethical monotheism. Then he continues his travels. There's a famine. He goes down to Egypt. What happens in Egypt? Stays in Egypt. When he comes back from Egypt, what happens? Where does he go back to? Surprise, surprise. He comes up, remember, with Lot and his family. And he continues back to where? Back to Beit El, where he was in the beginning. Back to his Mizbech. See the word Makom? El Makom HaMizbech. Remember? Look, Vayelech L'masav Minegev ad Beit El, ad HaMakom Asher Hashem Ola B'tchila, between Beit El and the Ai, El Makom HaMizbech. And what's he do there? Vayikra Sham Avram B'Shem Hashem. This Makom in Beit El, both the word Makom in Beit El and calling out in God's name and making a name for God, that's what Avram did before he went down to Egypt and when he comes back from Egypt. And that's the highlight of his career. Now, let's go back to then we have the whole incident with Lot. Lot decides to leave. Listen carefully what happens after Lot leaves. And God tells Avram, after Lot leaves him, Sanai Necha, lift up your eyes from this place in all four directions. See all four directions? Safon of the Negba, Ked Maviyama. Why? Ked Kola Arts Asher Torah Lechat Nena. That's the old blessing. You get this land, your children. V'samti et zaracha ka'afar haaretz. Hashim b'chal ish l'milot afar haaretz, king zaracha b'nei kumet alech ba'aretz. God repeats the blessing of the previous chapter before he went down to Egypt. Now we're back in Beit El, a very similar blessing. There, Avram continued south. Now God says, continue on your pilot trip. Go see the land. But in Beit El, at the place of his Mizbech, he's still in Beit El. He gets this blessing after Lot leaves, that your zera will be like Afar Haaretz, and you're going to spread out in all four directions. Now, just to highlight the parallel, let's go back to my screen here. We go back to, I'll just show you here real fast, make this a little smaller. I want to just review what we did. Perek Yud Gimel, this was Avram after Lot left in Perek Yud Gimel, and this is what we just read. Just match up. Haaretz Eshat HaShochev Aleh. God told him, "Is opening the land is yours." That's the same thing as it doesn't match up here. There's no, how do I make a line? I don't have a line to make a pen here. Maybe that. No, that doesn't work. Never mind. Okay, you can just, I'll just use my mouse. Okay, the aretz matches orange. Agreed? Then kafar aretz, afar haaretz. 4 directions. Yamav v'kei tzfon and v'negba. All 4 directions. Got it? V'nivru chuvacha we had from earlier. All that proves is simply that God is repeating the blessing. But what blessing? The blessing of Beit El. That's what's important. The blessing we have here is the blessing of Beit El, and that's a repeat. Now let's go back now to where we were before. I'm sorry. Let's go back to Yaakov's dream. What God said up until now is something old. And it's highlighting the blessing of Beit El, where Avram built the Mizbech and called out in God's name. And again, the connection to the word Makom. I'll highlight again Makom and Makom, just to make sure you remember that. Pasuk Tet Vav is something new. We never had this before, and you'll explain why in a minute. God says, Hinei Anochi imach, I'll be with you. I'm going to guard you everywhere you go. I'll bring you back here, and I won't abandon you until I've done what I promised. This is special to Yaakov because this is the first time a patriarch is leaving the land of Israel, even though he's chosen. And God's saying, even though you're leaving, I'm still with you. In fact, the Shekhinah now, according to Chazal, goes with Yaakov and leaves Yitzhak. God is now with Yaakov for 20 years when he's by Lavan. And that's why Chazal see this as a model in Maseh V'Simei Labanim. Yaakov is a model of Am Yisrael in exile, that even though we've left the land of Israel, God's with us even in our exile, but promises to watch over us and one day bring us back. So therefore, this is a blessing of reassurance, just like Avram needed a blessing of reassurance after Lot left him. Don't worry, you'll still have a legacy and you'll still be a nation even though your nephew left you. Here also, you're still chosen even though you're leaving the land. Now, that's the end of the Hitgalut. The revelation is over. What's Yaakov's reaction? What does he do? First, he wakes up in the middle of his dream. He says, Achen yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh. See the word again? He says, wow, he had no idea where he was sleeping was a place of God's presence. So first he's amazed, okay? And first his reaction is, oh my gosh, this is the place of God. Vayirav vayomar, ma nora hamakom hazeh. There we go again. Then he makes a statement. Ein zeh ki beit Elohim b'zeh shar shamayim. This is nothing else than the house of God and the gate of heaven. What's he talking about? Right? In his dream, he saw angels going up and down. That's Shar Shamayim. But in his dream, he did not see a house for God, did he? There's no house for God that he saw in this dream. He just saw angels going up and down. I'm going to leave that right now as a question, but keep that in mind. This statement that he says, this is nothing other than the house of God, somehow, for some reason, Yaakov seems to be saying, after his dream, and because of his dream, that this is the site of a Beit HaMikdash, of a house for God. But there's nothing in his dream that showed him a house for God. It makes sense that he said, this is the gate of heaven because I see angels going up and down. So maybe it's a connection between heaven and earth, but what makes it a house for God? Keep that question in mind. Now, what does he do next? I mean, it was probably the middle of the night. He goes back to sleep because he gets up later in the morning. Before he leaves, he's going to do something, and we're going to see Pasuk Yudchet Yotet, or preparation for his resolution. He gets up in the morning. This Evan that he was sleeping by, he puts oil on it. He puts oil on it to sort of consecrate her and he turns it into a monument. A matzeva is not an altar; it's a monument. It's a marker. He wants to remember this spot because he wants to return to the spot, and to make sure he knows where he's going to go back to. He puts oil. Hopefully, the oil will remain there. He'll see it, but he's consecrating this site, and he's putting up the Evan to be a monument to remember where to come back to. What does he do next? Vayikra Shema Makom Ahu Beit El, even though the name of the city was Luz. Now, Yaakov is not in charge from Misrad HaPnim of giving names to cities, is he? When Yaakov calls this Makom, see the word Makom again? This Makom he calls Beit El. He's not saying this is the name of the city. In my opinion, he's stating his resolve that this place one day will become a house for God. But it's not a prediction. I want to say it's going to be part of his resolution. I'll prove it in a minute. When Yaakov calls this place Beit El, he's saying, this is going to be a place where I want to build a house for God one day. Now, let me stop the screen for a minute. Didn't we see the name Beit El already in Parshat Lech Lecha? How could Yaakov call it Beit El if Avram was already in Beit El? Does everyone understand my question? In Perek Yud Bet and Yud Gimel, Avram goes to Beit El, doesn't he? But Yaakov only calls it Beit El some 50 years later, 100 years, who knows how many years later. Decades later, Avram, why does Yaakov call it Beit El now? So I'll share with you a little secret. Avram does not call it Beit El. Chumash tells us that where Avram built his Mizbeach was Beit El. You paying attention to that? Avram doesn't call the place Beit El. It's the place of Avram's Mizbeach where he calls out in God's name. The omniscient narrator of Chumash, who we refer to as God, or Chumash, is telling us that where Avram built his Mizbeach, and the highlight of his original Aliyah, and the highlight of his return, and the center of his mission, of his life in the land of Israel, that was Beit El, because that's where he built the Mizbeach and called out in God's name. And it's called their Makom, and it's called here. And therefore, what's Rashi tell us? I'm pretty sure it's Rashi, but for sure Chazal say, that when Yaakov wakes in the morning, oh my gosh, I was sleeping in the same place where my Zedi was. He says, you can't believe I was sleeping. This was where Avram Avinu was. How does he know? Because he read, now he understands Chumash. This was Avram, where Avram Avinu centered his life. Now, he's going to call Beit El. Chumash calls it Beit El because Yaakov called it Beit El. But because Chumash knows everything and was giving to us at Har Sinai, so in Parshat Lech Lecha, Chumash calls the place Beit El to tell us that's where Yaakov is going to, the same place where Avram was, is where Yaakov had his dream, or at least it's the same thing behind the two sites. Now, whenever God talked to Avram Avinu and promised him the land, Avram built the Mizbeach and called out in God's name. The same thing with Yitzhak. I can prove it, but you'll take my word for it. How about Yaakov? What should Yaakov do now? God just spoke to him, promised him the land. Why doesn't Yaakov do the same thing that Avram did? Or later Yitzchak? Why doesn't he build a Mizbeach and call it in God's name? Wouldn't you expect Yaakov to do that? He knows it's the God of Avram and Yitzchak. He knows that Avram and Yitzchak called out in God's name. He knows their tradition. Why doesn't he do the same thing his forefathers did? Anyone want to suggest an answer?
Well,
Marcel?
Yaakov is in the midst of a flight from potential danger. So his mission isn't like Abraham's was to now convert the masses and to project the mission that he's been given. Yaakov is literally fleeing for his life. So it's like, it's not the time in Yaakov's life where he's going to take on this mission.
Exactly. His life, he's a fugitive. He's running for his life. And we'll see in a minute, he's penniless, isn't he? How do we know he's penniless? Remember when Lavan, when he goes to Lavan, he doesn't have a penny, does he? And if you read carefully, when he gets to Lavan, he's more interested in a job than he is in a wife, isn't he? When he sees Rachel, he's excited because of Rachel, not just because Rachel's pretty, but because Rachel's watching the sheep. What's that mean? I can do a better job than she can. Remember? When it says when Yaakov sees the tzon, the sheep, and Rachel, then he gets excited and moves the rock. Because he wants to prove, I'm a better shepherd than she is. And he gets himself a job. Is that what happens? And he works for a whole month, a couple of weeks first for free, doesn't he? Then later he makes a deal about Rachel. Of course he liked Rachel, but he also wants a job. I'll prove to you that he cares about, he doesn't know how he's going to get through the next day. But Yaakov's life, he's anywhere close to what Avram was. Avram could make a name for God because he was established, he had a family, he had wealth. He could.
Hello.
In Yaakov's position, he has no audience. There's nothing for him to do there. But even though he would love to do what Avram was doing, he can't. So guess what he's going to do now? He's going to make a resolution. Okay? He's going to make a resolution that what? I wish I could do it now, but I can't do it now, but hopefully I will later on. And then I'm going to use that to explain this neder. Let's read the neder, and then we'll get back to trying to understand what he's saying, whether it's good or bad. What's his resolution? Vaydar Yaakov neder lemor, if God will be with me, and keep me and watch me wherever I go, and give me lechem lechol beged labosh. Why am I making a big deal about that line? What's that prove? What's he thinking about? He's not saying if God will be good to me and give me, a vacation in the Bahamas, or if God will be good to me and give me a new car. What he's worried about, what he's praying for, is the basics of life. Lechem lechol beged labosh. He has nothing. Okay? And then if I come back to my father's household. So these are all ifs, aren't they? The pasuk chaf for sure is ifs. If God will be with me and take care of me and give me to eat. Now, is chaf aleph an if or a then? Is he saying if God is good to me, then I'll make aliyah? No, if God takes care of me and makes me rich and gives me what to eat, then I'll make aliyah? Or is he saying if God is good to me and brings me back to Israel, then he'll be my God? We'll figure this out in a minute. Okay? But however you read pasuk chaf aleph, which is up for interpretation, let's look at his promise. What's he promised to do? The even azot asher samti matziva yebet elokim. V'cho asher titen li aser esranu lach. Yaakov is not making a prediction as a prophet. Oh, one day, 500 years from now, there'll be a house of God here. What's he saying? When I come back, I want to make a house for God. And now, in light of this, we can explain everything. Because look how the preparation. What did he do? In his preparation, what did he do? When he got up in the morning, remember, he took the Evan, he made it a matzeva, he put oil on the matzeva, and he called the place Beit El. What's that mean? I want to build a house for God here. Therefore, he says, when I get back, what am I going to do? This site, where I put up this monument to remember the site, and where I put oil to remember which rock, right? I'm going to build her a house for God. But as everyone knows, you guys probably work for shuls, you can't run a shul without a budget. And if God blesses me with wealth, I'm going to give 10% to support the shul. Maybe another 10% for tzedakah, but 10% for the building fund, or 10% for the operating fund of the mikdash. Maybe you'll give another 10% for I'll answer Phil's question. He's not saying only 10% for everything. He's saying 10% for the needs of the mikdash. And we'll see Ramban says, I'll also be the rabbi. Ramban says, Vayashem li lalukim, I'll be the rabbi. I build him a shul or a house for God, and I'll support it. He's going to do all three. The three things every shul needs is a rabbi, a building, and a budget. Now, about Pasach Rav Aleph, it's real easy to figure out. Why? Because it's so obvious that Yaakov's neder is based on God's promise. What did God say? I'll be with you. What's God say? If he'll be with me. Ushmarticha b'chol asher telech. If he'll take care of me. Ushmarani b'derech asher ani olech. The first two match perfectly, don't they? The perfect matches. This one and that one. Perfect match. Now, Vashivoticha, what did God say? I'll bring you back to this land. Got that? Which matches Vashavti b'shalom beit avi. Now, that proves that this is still the if. Because everything in the if is based on what God promised. I'll be with you, I'll take care of you, I'll bring you back to this land. And God says, if indeed you take care of me and watch me and bring me back to the land, the only one that doesn't match is kilo azavcha. I won't abandon you until I've done what I promised. But that has to match the Tanli Lechem Lachop, but Rashi brings this down. That kilo azavcha matches with Tanli Lechem Lachop beged bosh. Because someone abandoned in Yaakov's position is someone without food. Now Rashi brings, you know what proof Rashi brings to that? It's a beautiful proof he brings. He brings a proof from Nar Ha'iti V'gam Sekanti, a pasuk in Tilim. V'lo Re'iti Tzadik Ne'ezav V'zar Mavakesh Lachem. I'll share with you the Rashi. I think I have it here. Let me open up my toy. Rashi on Breshit. We meet Perek Chavchet. Here we are. No, we're in Perek Chavchet. Perfect. What's Rashi say? Where's his neder? Where's the neder? Here we go. Here we go. Okay. Here's this. See this? We're right over here. Rashi on Pasachav. Im yishmor li haftachot elu, should be haftachot, halalu, shiftechani ad lamala. If God keeps the promises he told me above, ve'eluhein, lioti madi, k'mo shemar b'nenuchi mach. He matches up like we did. Ushmarani ushmarticha. V'natan li lechem lecho, k'mo shamar lo ki lo azavcha, v'mavkesh lechem hu nezav, shenemar, v'lo reiti tzadik nezav, v'zar mavakesh lechem. This is a beautiful Rashi, how he matches them all up. And v'shavti b'shalom, like he said, v'shivoticha al adama. But what we just did on our little thing is exactly the way Rashi matches them up. And this is Vayashan Lila Olam. What's Rashi saying? That all my children will be chosen. Remember our drawing? Unlike all the other people were chosen, who only one of their children were chosen, Yaakov is saying, if I'm indeed chosen and all my children will be chosen, that means the Bechira process is over. And then it will be time to return and build the house for God. So how are we doing time-wise? I have another 15 minutes. Okay. So if I go back to the neder, what I want to explain now, and I'll understand the way we divided things up, Yaakov is not being a fair weather Jew and saying, if God takes care of me, I'll take care of him. But rather he's saying, because right now I can't fulfill that, but as soon as I can, I will. But he's showing his resolve, his resolution, and that's why this is always great for the time of year of Hanukkah, because when you're in a position where you have a long-term goal to make a house for God, he wants to be even more than Avram Avinu. If the Bechira process is over, I can settle down with the family, not just a mizbeach, a temporary place, and calling out in God's name and on the move. I can build a permanent place for God, a makom kavua. Remember later in Devarim, makom l'shivchar Hashem is the name of the Mikdash, the Shekin Shmo Sham, to make his name known. Yaakov is hoping that he'll come back and the Jewish nation will begin and he'll fulfill the goal of Avram Avinu. Now, to explain his neder, I want to make up a little story because you guys know shul rabbis. Okay, a shul rabbi is visiting two congregants in a hospital, both deathly ill, in critical condition. One is very wealthy businessman. The other is, not just a regular old balabas. So the balabas tells Rabbi, pray for me. If I get better, I promise I come to minyan every day and I'll help you in shul and I'll fold the chairs and I'll do everything you need. I'll help you make the minyan every day. I'll be there kavua. Just make sure I'm healthy. The rich man says, Rabbi, if I get better, I'm giving $50,000 to the shul. Sure enough, 6 months later, they both recover. And the balabas every day is in shul and kept his promise, just like he said he would. Right. The wealthy man never gave a penny. Comes out of Rosh Hashanah, comes to shul. Rabbi says, good to see you're healthy. He says, yeah, I'm glad to be back, Rabbi. Rabbi says, don't you remember, Rabbi, when you were deathly ill? Rabbi says, don't you remember that you made a pledge that if you recovered, you give $50,000 to the shul? He says, Rabbi, if that's true, I must have been really, really sick. I hope you understand. I hope you got the joke. Now, what's behind the joke? What I'm getting at? Those two vows are totally different. The balabas's vow is what? If God makes me healthy, if God answers the prayer and gets me back to shul, I'll come to minyan every day. Now, he's saying that because right now he can't, but as soon as I can, I will. The wealthy man, he's in critical condition. He could write the check right on the spot, or he can do the bank transfer. Got it? What's he saying? Only if God helps me, I'll help him. I want to clarify that. That's the most important point I'm trying to make. And that goes back to my question. Is Yaakov doing something tricky again? Oh, if God helps me, I'll help him. Otherwise, forget him. He's not saying that. He's not saying, if God helps me, only then I'll help him. He's not like the rich man saying, if God makes me healthy, I'll give him $50,000. I can give it now. He's saying, I wish I could do it right now, but I can't because of my predicament. If God helps me with my predicament, then as soon as that's able, I'll be able to do it for him. And he can almost understand the aim is not if, but rather when. He's not doubting God, he might be doubting himself. But Yaakov is not doubting God's promise. When he says im, he's not saying, oh, maybe he won't, maybe he will. Im could be when he happens, or he might say, like he says later, katonti, if indeed I'm worthy of God's help, and that happens, then as soon as I come back, I'll do that. Now, why do most people not pay attention to this? For a very simple reason. Because later in Yaakov's life, what happens? He never fulfills the neder, does he? Yaakov doesn't build a house for God, does he? And that's why it seems like he's talking about a prediction, because only David HaMelech is going to start fulfilling that neder. That's why Varech David. Remember, Baruch Hashem Elhei Yisrael Avinu. That's David HaMelech when he's passing over to Shlomo all the materials to build the Beit HaMikdash. David gets everything ready to build the Mikdash. And the concept of building a house for God begins with David HaMelech, who in essence is Yaakov and Esav in the same character, isn't he? David has the hands of Esav and the call of Yaakov. That's a shir on David HaMelech. Now, why doesn't Yaakov fulfill his neder? Here's another question. No, Yaakov made a neder. Why doesn't he fulfill it? Well, when he comes back to Beit El, it's almost tragic. Why? Because he returns first to Shechem like Avram did. But what happened in Shechem, as Harold mentioned before, remember the incident in Shechem where they massacred the whole city? You could say good thing, right thing, depending on your political alignment or whatever you want to say. You don't want to get into the argument. But whether they did the right thing or the wrong thing, after that event, what does Yaakov say? Remember, achartemoti, you made me look really bad in the eyes of the people of the land. Labisheni b'yoshvei haaretz. I look really bad now. They're going to come and kill me. What you did something crazy dangerous. You're endangering the entire family and our future with your vigilance. So, of course, you cared about your sister, but I cared about the future of the Jewish people. What are you doing that? Yaakov was really angry for the massacring the whole city. He doesn't mind them saving Dinah, but you could save Dinah and go home. Why loot the whole city and kill everybody? Yaakov was angry because they overdid it. They say, what do you mean? We're going to teach them a lesson. But people in this country need to know that you don't mess with us. It was what's called a disproportionate, what they call a tkuva, a disproportionate reaction to teach them a lesson. Now, whether they did the right thing or wrong thing, Yaakov now is in no position to build a house for God because no one respects them. Even David wanted to build a house for God. God said, wait a generation because you need a time of peace. Remember God told David, you're a man of war. You're living in a time of war. You can't build a house for God and make my name great when people still hate you. Wait one more generation. You have a son, his name will be Shlomo because he'll be living in a time of peace. Remember, there's a time for war and a time for peace in Kohelet, which is associated with Shlomo. You only build a house for God when people respect you, when they look up to you. And unfortunately for Yaakov, he had hoped to build a house for God, but he can't because the situation doesn't allow it. Instead, he runs away to Beit El as a city of refuge. God tells Yaakov, you know what? You want me to save you from the people of Shechem and the neighbors of that area? Run away to Beit El. That's the beginning of Perek Lamed Hey. If I share my screen, I'll go to Sefer. We're over here. We'll go right to Perek Hey. What happened? Numbers. Oh, here we are. We want to go to Perek Lamed Hey. Actually, we'll look at Lamed, the end of Lamed Vav first. What happens there? And Yaakov tells Shimon and Levi, "Achartem oti lavisheni b'yoshvei haaretz." Ani Beiti might be in my house, might be his household, or maybe even the house he hoped to build for God. And they say back, they get the last word in. We're not going to let them treat our sister that way. Again, without going right or wrong, right afterwards, what happens? God tells Yaakov, go back to Beit El and build a mizbech to who? To the God who appeared to you when you ran away from Esav. God gets them ready. And Yaakov tells them, we're going to go to Beit El and we'll build a mizbech to the God who answered me in my times of trouble. Okay? And what does he do there? He builds a mizbech, okay? Because that's where God appeared to him when he was running away from his brother. What's sad about this is that Beit El, instead of being a house of spreading God's name and making a name for God, becomes a house of refuge where God comes and saves us. It's what's called, Yaakov is in survival mode instead of revival mode. Avram Avinu is Am Yisrael in revival mode. Yaakov is Am Yisrael in survival mode. So you need a house for God, a Beit El, but only a Beit El in the limited sense that it's where God protects us and takes care of us from enemies who hate us. But hopefully a Beit Elohim, a house for God like the David's going to want to build and Shlomo's actually going to build, is when people respect us and look up to us, and then we can make a name for God. And then later, or earlier, without going to the topic, God appears to Yaakov with the name El Shaddai. He changes his name. Remember, God tells Yaakov, Ani El Shaddai, Peri Urvei, and the land I'm going to give you. He returns to Beit El, but because he can't build a Mikdash, when Yaakov returns to Beit El and he changes his name from Yaakov to Israel, then what happens? After God appears to him and reaffirms that he's chosen, Yaakov puts up a matzeva again puts oil on it, and again calls the place Beit El. Basically, what does he do? He reaffirms his commitment. He can't build a house for God, but he's hoping maybe in 10, 20 years, things will quiet down, and maybe then he can build a house for God. He doesn't want to forget the spot. He hopes to return. Within 4 or 5 years, 10 years, they sell Yosef. The family falls apart. Then there's the famine and everything. And unfortunately, Yaakov's life is a disaster, isn't it? What's my proof? When Yaakov came before Pharaoh, he looked like an old man, right? What did Pharaoh ask him? Jacob, how old are you? What did Yaakov say? He gave a Jewish answer, right? He says, I'm 130 and my life's been what? I've had a miserable life. Remember? I've had a miserable life. And you can't bring a better proof about Yaakov's life from that. It's sad. It's such a tragedy, his life. But he always meant well. He always meant well. His goals were great. But the situation was in, it's so typical of Jewish history. We have great goals, but the reality of the situation you're in, irregardless who's to blame for it, but keeping your goals in sight, even though you can't fulfill them, that'll be relate later to Hannah. Now, in the last 4 or 5 minutes, that was the main thing I tried to show you now. I'm trying to use this idea to explain all the stories about Yaakov. Now, the last thing I'll talk about is why he's favoring Yosef and Binyamin. So I want to share an idea which requires a whole share, but I'll just try to explain it. It's called Who Knows 3, Who Knows 4, or basically why it should be one matriarch per patriarch. It's only logical to assume that there's 3 patriarchs. Okay, so I could say why 3, but there are 3 patriarchs. But look at Marsa Machpelah. Every patriarch should have one matriarch. Avram had one matriarch, Sarah, even though he had other wives. Yitzchak, one matriarch, Rivka. Now, I'm assuming that everyone's assuming that Yaakov can only have one matriarch. But it's up for grabs, isn't it? If you would ask Yaakov, who's the matriarch, what would he say?
Rachel.
Why? I'll quote Yehuda, Atem yedatem, ki shnayim yadali ishti. Remember Yehuda in front of Yosef, begging for mercy for Binyamin, saying, he's trying to say, my father will be so upset if I don't bring Binyamin back. Remember what did he say? Atem yedatem ki shnayim yadali ishti, vaytzech miti b'amar toraf toraf, u'kraktem gam et zeh, b'kra yisod, v'hartim et shtevati, shola. That was Phil's question, wasn't it? Why such favoritism to Rachel's kids? For a very simple reason. Yaakov is sure that Rachel was a matriarch because that was his wife. Everything else was a trick. Lavan tricked him. Okay, you take responsibility. He'll support them. He'll put them through college. But Rachel is the matriarch. He's sure of that. And therefore, he has 2 chosen children. Who are they? Yosef and Binyamin. Now, should something happen to Yosef, boy, that would be terrible for him. He couldn't get over it, right? But let's say something did happen to Yosef. What would be his last straw of hope? Binyamin. If something would happen to Binyamin, you follow? I'm trying to explain Yaakov's behavior. Now, just like Avram gave presents to Keturah's children and Yishmael, etc., and Hagar's kids, and Yaakov and Yitzchak and Esau still got along. He came back for he's not the chosen son, and therefore Yaakov is sure that his one, the matriarch, assuming there can only be one, the matriarch is Rachel, and the 2 chosen children are Yosef. That's why he makes him a colored coat, and Binyamin is the backup now. He's the other chosen son, because Rachel is a matriarch. She died, Rachmanis, you follow? But he's devastated by that, isn't he? But she's a matriarch. What can you do? What do Leah's kids think? Leah's kids are also sure there's only one matriarch, but they look at the news and they look at the events. Isn't it crystal clear that God wants Leah? Ask any time. Isn't it clear that God wants us back in our land? Look at World War I, or look at the Balfour Declaration, or look at the 6-Day War, and look at God's saying we're supposed to be back here, isn't it? How could you think otherwise? That's not a Ma'aseh Satan. That's Ritzon Hashem. How did Lavan get away with that trick? That's got to be God. How did Lavan sneak Leah in there? How come Leah's got kids like that, and one after the next, and Rachel can't have children? You follow? God is screaming, Leah's chosen. He has Rachmanas on Rachel, maybe gives her a kid, but clear Leah's chosen. Doesn't she make it the Marta Machpelah? It's not Rachel. It's a really touchy issue with them. Now, Leah's kids are so sure they're the only ones, got it? Because they're sure that's Ratzon Hashem, that's what God wants, because there's only one matriarch. Now, if Yosef and Binyamin play with Bilhah and Zilpah, by the way, Bilhah and Zilpah's kids, no one even considered, right? The half-bloods, no one ever dreamt that Bilhah and Zilpah's kids would be chosen. They're no different than Hagar's kids. Hagar's or Keturah, they're maidservants. They're half-bloods. There's no way they could be chosen. The children grow up thinking it's either Rachel's kids or Leah's kids. Who's Yosef playing with? With Bnei Bilhah, Bnei Zilpah. And the chosen sons are Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Don't they take all the action, don't they? Reuven takes leadership, Shimon. Now, imagine after Rachel died, who should be in Yaakov's tent? Leah should come. If Yaakov would take Bilhah, who would be really offended? Wouldn't Leah's kids be really offended if Yaakov dumped their mother, the chosen mother, and took Bilhah? What did Reuven do to stop that? That's why he stopped. You understand why he did it? That was a protest. So Yaakov, in order that Yaakov couldn't be with Bilhah because someone else slept with her. But he wasn't doing it out of lust. He did it out of protest because for the sake of his mother. I'm trying to show you that explains their behavior. Now, if Yosef would leave everyone alone, okay. But he starts dreaming about what? I'm the only one? They're all bowing down to me? He doesn't get the message from God that you're not chosen. God doesn't want Bnei Rachel. So if he kept quiet, fine. But with all these dreams about being great, we got to get rid of. He's a danger to Klal Yisrael, isn't he? And they want to get rid of him. So they're sure they're doing the right thing when they get rid of Yosef. Remember this Baal HaChalamot. What's he dreaming? It can't be his dream. It's a dream. He's just, and his father's fault. Now, they know their father thinks otherwise. Has the father ever been wrong in the process? Avram was wrong about Yishmael. Yitzchak was wrong about Esav. Yaakov's wrong about Yosef. You follow? There's a pattern going on. And Bnei Leah are sure that they're chosen. Got it? And I'm just using that to explain Yaakov's behavior and the brothers' behavior because they have this different understanding of the Bechira process. What I want to end the shir with, which I think is a really important message for today. What was Yosef's dream? Okay. The brothers are growing up fighting over who's the only one, right? Assuming only one matriarch and only either their kids or those kids. And they're fighting over, who counts and who doesn't count. Whose derech is the right way. God gives Yosef a dream. And everyone thinks that Yosef is dreaming n equals 4. Let me go back to my screen. Let me go back to the screen here. Yosef is dreaming. People think he's dreaming n equals 4. If you understand my drawing. No, now that but that's only a dream. That can't be. Another generation of this? No way. So they want to get rid of Yosef. But let me go over here 1 second. What is Yaakov thinking? Yaakov's thinking I call n equals 3r. You understand the drawing? 3 Rachel. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov and Rachel. And 2 tribes, Yosef and Binyamin, and Bnei Leah are out, and the Shpachot. Leah's kids are sure that what? That Leah is the matriarch, and there's 6 tribes. Now, who would be the Bechor? Reuven? Well, he should be the Bechor, but he lost it. Remember with Bilhah. Shimon and Levi, they lost it because of Shem. Yehuda, he proves himself. That's why he's the Bechor. But Rachel and the Bnei Shvat, they're out. And that's how Leah's growing up, Leah's kids, and that's how what Yaakov thinks about Rachel. There's a machloek between Leah's kids and their father. In the midst of all this, God's giving Yosef a dream. And what's he telling him in the dream? There's 2 parts of the dream. Let me go back to one other sheet for it. That's the end of the day, his dream. He was dreaming not Bechira, he's dreaming Bechorah. And what was God trying to tell them? Remember the opening blessing that we're a generation after Yitzchak, but what was Yitzchak thinking? You should be wealthy, right? And you should be a leader of nations, but your brothers will bow down to you. This is Yosef's first dream about collecting wheat in the field, isn't it? Brov the Gambati Rosh. Yosef's first dream about wealth and prosperity is gathering the sheaves in the field. The second dream, who's bowing down to Yosef? The sun, the moon, and 11 stars. Remember who knows 11? Now, no one understood the dream. Who finally figured out the dream? Yosef, after graduating divination school. Why? Because first he solved other people's dreams, the butler and the baker, and then Pharaoh's dreams. Now he can figure out, when the brothers come down, he remembers his own dream. What was he dreaming? Realize? The sun and the moon, the sun is Egypt, the solar calendar, the sun god. Mesopotamia, there's a moon god seen. The calendar is lunar. Egypt and Mesopotamia bowed down to Yosef. And that's Yabdu Chamim Mishavulumim was Yosef. That's also Yosef. But that's the dream. But what's the chiddush of the dream? Chiddush of the dream that there's 11 stars, which means what? If there's 11 stars, let me take the share off. If there's 11 stars in the dream, all back, that means we're all chosen. It's not 6 stars or 2 stars or 3 stars, you follow? No, you're part of the same nation. You're the Bechor, not the Bechir. God's telling Yosef, you're not the only one. You're the leader of the family. But how big is your family? 11. What's that mean? There's 2 matriarchs and 2 shvachot. There's actually 4 matriarchs. You follow? All the tribes, even the half-bloods are chosen. No one can even fathom that growing up because it's either us or them. How many hashkafa can there be? And God's telling him there's room and there's a need for 12 tribes from different mothers, even from half-bloods. Even though you're chosen, you don't have to be pure stock. You can be, forget what the Harry Potter analogies. But I think, and there's room for 12 tribes. Each one has their own flag. Each one has their own understanding of what needs to be. Like there's a need for if you're going to be a model for other nations to work together, you have to be 12 tribes with different outlooks, but who can work together. You can have a common goal, even though you have different outlooks on life. And that's already my hashkafa. I'm reading into the story probably. But I think what God was trying to tell them in Yosef's dream, remember, Yosef tells the dream to his brothers, no one gets the dream. God was screaming to them, grow up, quit fighting. There's nothing to fight about. You can all be chosen. And they just don't get it. God had to send a pandemic, not pandemic, but to get them to wake up and realize there's too much sinat chinam, even though they're sure there's always reasons for it. I hope you got the message. That was my point for the end of this year. So I tried to show you, with that understanding of the Bechira process, the idea of Bechora and Bechira, and the Bechora's responsibility, not privilege, and there's a goal involved in being God's people, but I'm trying to find a logic. Everything Yaakov does makes sense, even though he might have made the wrong decisions at times, and he pays a heavy price for them, but he really meant well. And sometimes in life you really mean well, and you have a goal, but things just don't work out right. But that's not a reason to take oil and maybe light candles on Hanukkah and remember that even when times are down, there's always a better future sometime in the future. So that's why Yaakov is always going to be the symbol of Am Yisrael in Galut or in exile when things are far from perfect, but not giving up on your long-term goals, even though life is pretty lousy. So we'll stop here. I'll take questions, but I know I went over time a little bit. Yeah, question, Harold.
Okay, so just maybe a different perspective on Yaakov's inability to build the house of God. Based on the pasuk that we mentioned at the beginning, when Moshe Rabbeinu was told by God to tell Paro that B'ni Bechori, that Israel is my firstborn, and Rashi says that this moment in time is now the kiyum of the Mechirat Bechora from Esav to Yaakov, meaning that even though Yaakov made a neder, he was not obligated to actually finish or be that work itself, because that's not how Jewish history works. So Yaakov did what he needed to do to build some kind of a foundation that ultimately would lead to a kiyum of that particular event or that particular neder, and the kiyum occurred generations and years or hundreds of years later. So
I'll add something to that, Harold. When is Rashi living?
in
Under
the,
Christian rule, right? Right for around Crusader time, little
Yeah.
there. Who's Edom? Who's Esav in Jewish thought, in medieval thought?
right,
Edom
Christianity.
is
Yeah,
Christianity, right? Okay.
correct.
What position are they in? They're running the show, aren't they? They're the Bechor. Got it? And the argument is, who's Bechor? Who's God's firstborn? Is it the Christians or is it the Jews? Don't you chap Rashi? Rashi's commentary is right on the mark for his time period. I can argue historically whether it's proud of the pasuk or not, but that's such a great example of Rashi understanding his time period and what he's reading into Edom. Because I'm sure Edom is not Rome, but thematically Edom is Rome. Once Edom becomes Rome, then you understand that the ancient Rome, Egypt is ancient Rome. That they got everything, we have nothing. And just like Am Yisrael was in Egypt, that's Am Yisrael compared to the Christians in Rashi's time. A small nothing people being oppressed and everything. But despite all that, you think you're the Bechor, we're the Bechor. And that Rashi is awesome, isn't it? When you understand the history behind it. I'm not sure whether Rashi that's really pshat of the psukim there, but the insight is awesome. Yeah, it's right on the mark. I forgot that Rashi, but that Rashi is great. And already?
Well, I think it also explains Jewish history that the fact is, and that one's legacy, even if one does not see the fruits of your labor in your lifetime, that doesn't mean that you still have a legacy. It doesn't mean you've been unsuccessful in accomplishing what God had intended for you to accomplish.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is exactly the Ibn Ezra, isn't it? Shebrichat hanavi kein tefillah Hashem ki ikar zot habracha zaram. It's not Yaakov and Esav, it's the future of the Jewish people. It might take thousands of years till it happens. I think that's what Ibn Ezra is alluding to, which is also the same time period, isn't it? Ibn Ezra?
Well, yeah, they all are.
Okay, very good. Thanks for pointing that out. That was awesome.
All right, Yeshua.
Okay, everyone have a wonderful day. It's good seeing you guys again. Vayisi used to be Shabbat Betel. Oh, come visit Betel. Okay, that's right. Shabbat Betel. But that's dangerous because is Betel Yerushalayim or Betel near Ramallah? You follow? Is Betel Yerushalayim or is Betel where the Yishuv Betel is now today? That's a big machloket between archaeologists, Pashtanim, etc. But we can machmir and hold by both. The Beitel is Beitel and Beitel is Yerushalayim. Two Bechinot to the Beit HaMikdash. Okay. Anyway, thanks. By the way, that argument, who's the Bechor between Rachel and Leah, that goes on to alter by Rishon, doesn't it? Is the Beit HaMikdash in Yehuda or in Beitel? Is the kingdom from Yehuda or Ephraim? We don't get over that machloket for a long time. We're trying to continue it also. Okay. Anyway, thanks so much and have a good week, everybody, and everyone stay healthy.
Do well.
אוקיי. שבת שלום. כל טוב, תודה רבה.
Okay, bye-bye.
טוב, תודה רבה. אנחנו